everybody. I'm Fabrizio Maccioni. I'm a technical marketing engineer in the enterprise switching team, and I mainly focus on programmability and automation. And with me, I have Rick Sherman and Rob Lee from Puppet. So in case we have any specific question on Puppet, we have some people that can directly reply to your question. Today in my session, I'm going to discuss about continuous integration and continuous deployment, or as it relates to networks, right? So how we can use same approach that the software developers, especially in the DevOps and the NetDevOps teams, are using in order to increase the pace of change and innovation that they have in their infrastructure and in their solution. So I'm going to define what's the problem statement, define what we mean by CI/CD, how it relates to networking infrastructure and customers, and network customers. Then I'm going to show a demo. It's the same demo that we showed in a PuppetConf back in October 2017 with the help of Rick and Rob. And then QA. And of course, you don't need to wait until the end for QA. You can stop me anytime as usual. So what's the problem? The problem that many organizations are facing, it's an increase of changes that combine with the natural resistance of change. We know that a lot of customers, especially in the networking team and especially in the operations team, they have a certain resistance to change. Don't change unless it's really needed. So increase of changes with the resistance of change is creating some challenges for the customers. And this is creating very long development cycles. It's slowing down the innovation, which is exactly the opposite of what customers are trying to do. And that in turn gets an increased IT operation costs. So what some organizations are trying to deploy is they try to reuse same approach that the software developers are using with the CI and CD. Where with the CI, the continuous integration, the idea is to make several changes a day per developer. So instead of having very long cycles, developers can publish their code in a shared environment, even a different time during the day. And the key in the continuous delivery is automatic testing, so that every change is automatically tested, and we'll see how, so that even the confidence on change will increase. And then, depending on how you deploy the changes, either manually or automatically, you have the continuous delivery or continuous deployment. That's the difference between the two. And while we see most of the customers that are approaching CI/CD, most likely will start with the continuous delivery. Over time, they might move to continuous deployment. Okay? So in our case, the application is the network. So the same approach we are trying to reuse inside the networks so that we can increase the changes that you can place in the network itself. And we don't need to wait for a maintenance window that might happen in weeks. In CI/CD, the workflow that usually is named pipeline, it's typically starts with you code, and you use a source code repository using tools like Git, GitHub, GitLab, and Gogs, and so forth. And the key is that when you code and you do a pull request, if the pull request is accepted, you move to the next stage where you build or set up the environment where you are going to test all the changes, right? And typical build server are Jenkins, GitHub, Travis CI, and all the others that are in the slide. These are the most common that we see. And virtual environments, it's plenty of options from Cisco Viral, Docker, KVM, Vagrant, depend which one the customer is more familiar with.
Just a comment. Many people want to do the test before the pull request. So you want to test before you merge, not after it's already done.
We do exactly that even in the demo. Okay. We have 3 different environments. Mm-hmm. One is a virtual environment that is in the developer testing environment, and could be even in their own laptop, as we do using a CSR1KV, for instance. Then we have a staging environment where most of the time we use physical devices, and then we move into production. And in every phase, we do the testing. Testing, it's very similar in all the 3 stages, but sometimes we can do more, especially when you go toward the production. Yeah, good point. Coming to testing, even here there are some improvements compared to the standard testing. Most of the time, ping and traceroute are the only tools that are used just to verify that the changes haven't broken the network. But that's not enough. So at this point, we needed to introduce more testing. We need to double check whether the neighborship are still up. Maybe do some performance testing just to make sure that the path hasn't changed and has created any issue with the performance of the network itself. Maybe checking some configuration in key devices. But for sure, we needed to introduce more testing in the environment. And common tools, Puppet Beaker, Python, Todd, even you are familiar too because I've read some articles about that. And Behave is another one, a pretty common one that most organizations are looking at.
Now from the practical perspective,
yep.
The biggest pain in all this is writing unit tests.
Correct.
So how do your customers that are already using this approaching that problem?
They are still, most of the organizations are still considering to move to CI/CD. So we don't see a lot of customers already deploying it. So maybe they have some pilot projects, but we don't have a lot of references in that standpoint. So we are trying to work with them, trying to define some of the testing, but we don't have a lot of experiences so far at that point. So in case the test fails, of course, there is a human intervention because we need to see what failed, fix the issue, and run the test again. Or in some cases, you start completely from scratch to code, build, and test again, depending on the failure itself.
Do you have some examples of tests that you could do later?
In the demo, we have a very basic test.
Okay.
I can talk about which are tests that some of the customers.
Just to see how you test it.
It goes from reachability or checking whether the neighborship are still up, if the main configuration and uplinks of the main devices are still up, and stuff like that.
Yeah, effectively, you execute show commands or execute REST API calls. You look whether you get what you expect.
Yeah. And what we are trying to do with some of the customers is trying even to move away from CLIs and trying to reuse the APIs and netconf Yang to make even the testing a little bit more reliable.
You could leverage the network assurance engine.
You could do even a network assurance engine, yes. So there are many different options, and we can provide some guidelines for customers that are starting with this journey. But then, in the end, it will be up to the customer to define which is the best validation and the best test for them and for their infrastructure.
Yeah, effectively, it's really hard to do if you're starting in brownfield because you already have 100 features deployed. In the ideal case, the moment you deploy a new feature, you also write the unit test that thoroughly tests that feature.
Before that and then implement. But that's the philosophy.
It is. But sometimes from the testing, you end up writing a new test when you get some failure. So at the next time, your testing will be more reliable. That's what usually happens.
I don't do it either, but I should do.
And as I mentioned before, depending on if the deployment is manual or automatic, we have a continuous delivery or continuous deployment. And most of the time, to push the final configuration to the device, configuration management tools like Puppet are very common. And again, when you do the deployment, you need to validate where all the changes have been successful and if there is any issue with the network or everything is fine. If it's not fine, you can roll back. And rollback can be either at the device layer or it would be even better to do at the network layer, meaning that if for your change you have changed the configuration of different devices, you roll back the configuration in each one of them. Notify and track, it's key. So you need to keep track of all the changes that you have done, and there are a lot of tools to track the changes, and notify when there is any change, especially in production, is key as well. And these are common tools that we see and we are using even in our demos. How many of you are familiar with Tropo? Tropo is a Cisco acquisition we made last year, as far as I remember. It's very useful, especially for automating the notification either by text messages or call. And you can even create automation during the call or during the text exchange. And I'm using Tropo in the final demo. So one of the key in CI/CD is picking the right tools. And the problem is that there are so many tools, it's very complicated to pick and choose the right ones, right? And there are companies like Xavier Labs that have gone through trying to select which are the most common tools. They are grouped in categories. They are classified on open source or in enterprise products. And it's a dynamic periodic table. So if you go in the website, you can submit your tool, and there will be a little bit of process. If it's accepted, the tool will be added to the periodic table. Okay? But the key in a CI/CD is picking and choose the right orchestration tool. Right? Could be Jenkins, could be Kitchen CI. We have seen some of them. But this is key because the build server is the one that is going to orchestrate the entire CI/CD pipeline and CI/CD framework. Okay? And hopefully, the network devices are Catalyst 9K running ISXe with our intent-based networking that we have seen even in the DNA Center presentations. So far, so good. Any question? Good. So as I mentioned before, back in October 2017, we were at the PuppetConf, and we worked with Rob and Rick to build the demo using Puppet and using the CI/CD framework. And sometime back, we challenged Puppet in order to create an agentless architecture, because especially in the enterprise space, we see customers are very conservative. They don't love the idea to have a third-party software running on the device itself. And for us, having a Puppet implementation without the need of an agent, so using an agentless architecture was key. So what we demoed during PuppetConf was the agentless architecture. And the demo that you showed, that I'm going to show in a minute, essentially we have all the code in GitHub, and we are using Jenkins and the Jenkins pipeline to orchestrate everything. And we've used a Puppet Task. Puppet Task is a new feature that has been announced during PuppetConf that we are using in the demo, and customers were very surprised and happy to see the integration of Puppet Task in the demo while they were announcing the feature itself. But essentially, Puppet Task will allow you to have ad hoc services so that every stage of the pipeline can be a task. That's what we have done in the demo. So Jenkins is going to use run Puppet Task to download the code from GitHub, create a checkpoint of the configuration, change the configuration onto the device, validate the changes, and in case everything is fine, it's going to save the configuration. If the validation fails, it's going to use the same checkpoint that we have done in phase 2 to roll back the configuration on the device itself.
So it's actually a test made in a production environment?
The production environment is my setup in San Jose, yes. But that's what it does.
So you're not using Puppet to build the manifest and push the manifest down to the device and then on the device sync the current state with the desired state in the manifest?
No. In this case, we are just coding the configuration of the device in GitHub, and we are pulling the configuration from GitHub to Puppet.
You're using Puppet as a very low-level orchestration tool. Do this, do this, do this, do this.
And all the interaction between Puppet and the Catalyst 9K, it's based on netconf APIs. So we are creating a checkpoint.
So there's the next question. Do you have Puppet agent running on the box or not?
We don't. That's the key. It's an agentless architecture. It is, and we are using a netconf to interact between the Puppet server and the device. That was the main key, the main announcement that we made in PuppetConf.
And then, of course, the next question, comparing Puppet to Salt. Salt has these minions where you must run a minion per device, and it's dedicated to that device. How does Puppet handle the proxy thingies?
I believe you don't need a minion, but maybe Rick, you can provide them more info.
Right now we're using a tool called Puppet Device. It's actually been in Puppet for several years.
Oh, that one, yeah.
That does actually support multiple devices. It currently processes those in serial, so we actually group them by configuration files. And this year we're also working on improvements to the agentless framework as a whole, so stay tuned for some serious changes there. But it will be a many-to-one relationship.
Thank you.
Okay.
But just only to clarify, but you had on some switches already a Puppet client implemented, yeah?
Yeah, correct.
So this is additional on top of that, yeah?
I used to work in the data center team before, and I work with the Puppet in order to create the Puppet agent for the Nexus devices, yes. But one of the key differences is that the enterprise customers are more conservative than data center customers. So most of the data center customers were okay on running an agent on the Nexus device. In the Catalyst devices, customers are a little bit pushing back on having an agent. So having an agentless architecture is very key. And let me run the demo. So let me first of all reset the configuration, and just to be politically correct, I'm gonna reset using an Ansible playbook. But essentially, in the only change that I'm doing in the configuration is creating a loopback interface with a description and an IP address, right? So with the Ansible playbook, I'm just removing the loopback interface from the devices.
Okay, now excuse me, but I have to ask this question. Why are you using Puppet, not Ansible? So what are you getting with using Puppet instead of Ansible, which seems simpler?
So the main point that we, especially in the enterprise space, we see only Puppet and Ansible. So customers are asking only for these two. So we are working with both. We are working with Puppet. We are working with Ansible to provide a CI/CD framework. And I'm going to explain right after the demo what we are doing with Ansible as well. But for us, they are just two different alternatives. We don't have a preference as Cisco, just providing option to the customers.
But is there any reason you chose Puppet for this particular presentation, or is it just one of the two?
It's one of the two, and we added a straight relationship with them for PuppetConf, so we are using the same demo that we did in PuppetConf. But as for our standpoint, they are just two different alternatives. We don't see one better than the other. There are pros and cons, for sure, but we don't have a preference there. So this is the Puppet Enterprise. We are managing 5 different devices. One is the Puppet Enterprise server itself. We have 3 Catalyst 9K and 1 CSR 1KV. So the CSR 1KV is used to make the testing in the developer environment, like the other Catalyst 9K are using for the staging and for the deployment in production.
So you're using CSRs for development testing, and then you're using the Cat 9Ks in production. How do you map the interface names?
The interface names are different. In this case, it's a loopback interface, so it's exactly the same. And the point that we don't have a Cat 9K V available yet, we are working on it, so I couldn't use a virtualized version of the Catalyst device. I'm using the CSR 1K V so that I can test everything on my device.
You can't test the whole configuration because the moment you start hitting physical interfaces, all bets are off.
This specific case, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Going in the Jenkins dashboard, so we have 2 different pipelines. The first one is the one that we have used at PuppetConf, where we had only one environment, which was the production environment. And then right after the conference, we enhanced a little bit the demo. So as I discussed before, we have 3 different environments. We have the development, staging, and the production environment. So I'm going to start the run. Since it takes a while, I'm going to show you what happened in a previous run. And what's nice about Jenkins is that it keeps track of all the steps that have been performed in the previous run. So as you can see, the first one, I'm downloading code from GitHub. In the second, I'm doing all the steps in the virtual environment. So what I'm doing, I'm creating the checkpoint using a Cisco IA Yang model.
So you are not building the virtual lab on the fly. You already have CSR 1K running somewhere.
Yes, running on my laptop. Yep. And then I'm changing the configuration using a Puppet device. I'm validating the changes, and validation in this case it's very simple. I'm checking the description of all the interfaces, and if I find a forbidden word, I'm rolling back everything because in this case the validation will fail. Since it didn't fail, everything was fine, I'm copying the configuration I'm saving the configuration on the device, still using netcon and YANG, using exactly the same YANG model that I've used before to create the checkpoint. Okay, so this is the run that I've done right now. And what's happening now, that I'm receiving an automatic call from Tropo, the tool that I've described before. So let me answer. So in Tropo, what I'm going to receive, it's a message with exactly the same alert that I'm receiving in the Spark room. So with what's the device that has been, the configuration has been changed on, at what time, and what's the change. And I can also, using Tropo, I can do also escalations, right? So it's a very nice tool that you can use to check what's going on production. Maybe a text message may be a better idea. You don't want to make a call every time that you change in production, but the escalation is up to the operation, the network operation center. So I can do escalate. I know it's hard.
To my change management guy, yeah?
Yeah, in this case I'm calling my manager. So I'm receiving another call. I can answer, and depending on what the escalation manager wants to do, I can roll back, or I can still escalate up. The logic, it's up to the customers. Okay.
This is not a drill.
This is not a drill, yeah. This is the Puppet demo. To your point, we are trying to do the same with the Ansible, and what we are doing, we are also creating some new playbooks. And instead of creating playbooks based on a generic configuration, we are creating the playbooks based on the Cisco validated design. In this case, right now we are working on the layer 2 Cisco validated design, and then we'll do some routing CVDs and so forth. So at the same time, we are creating playbooks based on CVDs and creating infrastructure for CI/CD. And we are going to publish very soon the results of the work so that the customer can build the entire infrastructure using all the tools that you can see in this slide against the CVD, or they can customize the playbooks as they prefer. That was all from my side. Any question for me or for Puppet folks?
Oh yeah, you said you will tell us what you're doing with Ansible.
That's what I've just shown here. This is the work we are doing with them. So it's the same approach. We are trying to do some more automation on the framework, and at the same time creating the playbooks against Cisco validated designs. Yeah, that was easy.
So this method I could basically use with all Cisco devices, yeah?
The approach, yes. The approach, yes. Yeah. And then depending on the device, of course, the playbooks and how you change the configuration will be different. But the configuration management tools will take care on how to translate from the intent to the configuration, either CLI or netconf, depending on the device and the operating system running on the device itself.
Here's the question, should I stay with a Puppet client for my Nexus devices, or should I also use that approach? Yeah.
Well, especially, in my opinion, using a netconf will be better because it introduces a more reliable infrastructure. But of course, for customers that are already using the agent, I don't know if they want to migrate from the agent to the agentless architecture. From my point of view, it would be better to move to the agentless architecture. You don't have to deal even with the agent installation, agent updates, and so forth.
Sure, that's a benefit, yeah.